before the heavens ruled over mortals, before temples rose from stone and sacrifices stained the earth red, there were stories whispered, not sung, stories not meant for daylight. You've heard of Zeus the thunderer, Odin the wise, Ra the radiant. But what if I told you these gods held secrets darker than any mortal king? What if the beings we call divine were born not from light, but from chaos, jealousy, blood, and fear? Some gods consumed their own children. Some demanded rivers of human hearts just to rise with the sun. Others shaped the world, then cursed it. These are the stories the scribes buried, the ones priests rebranded, the ones conquerors erased, scroll by scroll. But they were never truly lost. Tonight, we dig them up to reveal the true faces of the gods. Flawed, brutal, brilliant, and far more human than we were ever told. Mythology is everywhere. It lives in our calendars, our language, our movies, and even in the constellations we name. It's taught in classrooms as artful allegory, stories of heroes and monsters, love and war, good versus evil. But that version of mythology? It's just the polished surface. The real myths, the ones passed mouth to mouth, scratched into stone, buried in forgotten languages, are far more raw. They weren't meant to inspire. They were meant to warn. They told of gods who killed their fathers, married their sisters, drowned the world in fire or flood, and demanded sacrifice, not love. They were not moral guides. They were survival stories. But as civilizations rose and fell, as new religions conquered the old, these myths were rewritten, edited, censored, erased. Zeus became a fatherly king. Odin became a wise old wanderer. Ra, Vishnu, Enki, all reshaped to fit human ideals of order, control, and comfort. But if you peel back the layers, if you go beyond what the textbooks offer, a far stranger, darker, more profound mythology emerges. In this video, we're going to uncover the myths they never told you, the shameful truths of the gods, the betrayals buried in divine bloodlines, the forbidden tales too dangerous to survive empires and holy books, and the universal truth buried in them all, that even gods are not above fear, jealousy, and fate. Because mythology wasn't just about the gods. It was about us, how we saw the world, how we coped with the chaos, and how we made meaning from terror. And when we explore those dark corners, we don't just rediscover ancient stories. We rediscover ourselves. Modern portrayals of the gods often feel sanitized, distant, divine, and above human weakness. But in the ancient world, perfection wasn't a requirement for divinity. In fact, the gods were often more terrifying than the monsters they claimed to defeat. Let's begin with Zeus, king of the Olympian gods. To most, he's remembered for lightning bolts and grand temples. But peel back the marble statues, and you'll find a god consumed by lust, paranoia, and cruelty. Zeus overthrew his own father, Cronus, who had eaten all his siblings. He then punished Prometheus for giving fire to humanity, a gift that symbolized knowledge and defiance. Zeus chained Prometheus to a rock, where an eagle devoured his liver daily for eternity. He was also infamous for his relentless pursuit of mortal women, seducing, deceiving, or outright assaulting them in the form of animals, storms, and even golden light. Leda, Europa, Danae, Callisto. Their stories are not romances. They are warnings. And what of Odin, the wise all-father of Norse mythology? He traded one of his eyes for divine knowledge, a noble sacrifice, yes. But Odin didn't seek wisdom to help mankind. He sought it to secure power. He surrounded himself with the dead, the Einherjar, warriors slain in battle, who would fight for him at Ragnarok. He was a war god cloaked in riddles and poetry, but his hunger for power was relentless. He betrayed, manipulated, and made deals he couldn't escape. To the Norse, Odin was revered, but never trusted. Then there's Enlil, a major deity in Sumerian and Babylonian myth. When humanity grew too noisy, he sent a flood to drown them all. This wasn't punishment for sin, it was for inconvenience. Enlil didn't want prayers. He wanted silence. And in all these myths, violence is not just an act, it's divine currency. The gods kill each other. They deceive each other. They punish mortals who grow too clever or too ambitious. They are not moral role models. They are power personified. But this wasn't a flaw in the ancient worldview. It was the truth of nature, that creation and destruction go hand in hand, that power corrupts, that even the divine is bound by its own darkness. Ancient people understood something modern mythologists sometimes forget. Perfection is not relatable, but fear, betrayal, and hunger for control, that's universal. So why did we remake these gods into saints and sages? Because over time, religion replaced myth. And religion requires order, hierarchy, obedience, clarity. Mythology, by contrast, thrives in contradiction. It welcomes chaos. It teaches that even gods fall prey to jealousy, that the divine isn't always just, and sometimes that's the point. But the darkness in these myths wasn't just for shock. It was there to remind people, you're not alone in your flaws. Even gods wrestle with rage, loneliness, and grief. And perhaps that made them easier to worship. We imagine gods as fearless, immortal beings who reign above the storms of fate and time. But what if I told you some of the most powerful gods in mythology were defined not by strength, but by fear, and not fear of monsters or mortals, but fear of prophecy, death, and the end of their reign? Let's return to Zeus, the thunder-wielding Olympian. Even he wasn't above fear. A prophecy warned that a child born of the sea goddess Thetis would one day surpass his father. Zeus, afraid of losing power, did something cunning. He married her off to a mortal, Peleus, ensuring the child, Achilles, would be human, and thus no threat to the throne of Olympus. That's right. The greatest warrior of the Trojan War was the product of divine fear. In myth, fear drives gods to cruelty. Take Uranus, the primordial sky god. He feared being overthrown by his children, the Titans. So he buried them deep inside their mother, Gaia, trapping them in her womb. It didn't work. Cronus rose up and castrated his father, fulfilling the very fate Uranus feared. But nowhere is divine fear more central or more chilling than in Norse mythology. Here, the gods don't reign forever. They know exactly how and when they will die. Odin knows that Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, will break free and kill him at Ragnarok. And despite binding Fenrir with a magical chain, Odin knows his fate is sealed. He breeds warriors, trains them in Valhalla, prepares for the final war. But in the end, he still dies. That's not omnipotence. That's dread. The dread of inevitability. Even Egyptian gods feared decline. The sun god Ra, ruler of all, feared rebellion from both gods and men. In one myth, when humans plot against him, he sends the goddess Sekhmet to slaughter them. But when the bloodshed goes too far, Ra becomes afraid of what he unleashed. He tricks Sekhmet into drinking beer dyed red to look like blood, calming her rage, and saving humanity from his own wrath. And then there are the Aztec gods, perhaps the most tragically afraid of all. They feared oblivion. The sun god Tonatiuh demanded constant human sacrifice, beating hearts torn from chests, not out of cruelty, but desperation. Without this blood, he would not rise. Without death, the sun would fall. The gods were not just lords of life and death. They were dependent on mortals. Think about that. Mortals feeding gods. The divine afraid of fading into nothingness. Fear in mythology reveals a hidden truth. Even the most powerful beings live under shadow. Shadow of prophecy, of time, of rebellion, of chaos. They are not immune to fate. They are often slaves to it. And if the gods can be afraid, if they can be manipulated by destiny, undone by their own creations, overthrown by their own children, then what does that say about power itself? That it's fleeting, that the higher you rise, the harder you fall, that no throne, not even a heavenly one, is safe forever. In these myths, fear is not weakness. It's a mirror, showing us that even the divine trembles before the future. And just like us, the gods feared being forgotten. If fear is the shadow that haunts the divine, then betrayal is the blade they wield and fall upon. Because in mythology, the gods don't just battle monsters or mortals. They turn on each other. And when gods betray gods, the heavens shake. Let's start in ancient Egypt, where divine blood ran cold. The story of Osiris and Set is one of the oldest recorded betrayals in mythology. Osiris ruled as a wise and just king of Egypt. His brother, Set, envied his power. So Set tricked Osiris into lying inside a beautifully crafted coffin. then sealed it shut and threw it into the Nile. Later, he dismembered Osiris and scattered his body across the land. But betrayal did not end with death. Isis, Osiris's devoted wife, retrieved the pieces of her husband's body, reassembled him through magic, and conceived a child, Horus. Years later, Horus would avenge his father in a divine court battle against Set, a myth that blends courtroom drama, violence, and celestial succession. Even in the afterlife, power was never safe. Across the sea in the Norse realms, betrayal bleeds through every tale, and no figure embodies it more than Loki. Born a Jotun, yet blood brother to Odin, Loki was a shapeshifter, trickster, and occasional helper of the gods. But over time, his mischief grew darker. He insulted the gods at feasts. He manipulated events that led to tragedy. And worst of all, he orchestrated the death of Baldur, the beloved god of light. Baldur was invulnerable to everything, except mistletoe. Loki crafted a dart from the plant and tricked Baldur's blind brother into throwing it, killing him. It wasn't just a prank. It was the first crack in the wall before Ragnarok. And the gods' response? They bound Loki in chains beneath the earth, a serpent dripping venom into his face for eternity. A punishment fit not for a mortal, but for a traitor god. In Hindu mythology, betrayal often takes the form of cosmic conflict, even among the divine trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. In one tale, Brahma and Vishnu argue over who is superior. A blinding column of fire appears, stretching infinitely in both directions. They each attempt to find the ends. Brahma flies upward, Vishnu burrows downward. Vishnu returns, admitting defeat. But Brahma lies, claiming he reached the top. The fiery pillar is revealed to be Shiva, who punishes Brahma for his pride by removing one of his heads and declaring that he would never again be worshipped in temples. In this mythology, betrayal isn't always violent. Sometimes it's ego. But the consequences are still divine. In the Greek pantheon, betrayal is practically a family tradition. The gods of Olympus exist because Cronus betrayed his father Uranus. And then Zeus betrayed Cronus, just as the prophecy warned. Zeus then turned on Prometheus, who had helped him win the war against the Titans by chaining him to eternal torture. Even among the Olympians, alliances shifted like sand. Hera plotted against Zeus. Athena betrayed her own origins, siding with order over chaos. Ares and Aphrodite broke sacred vows with lust and deception. In nearly every pantheon, the divine family tree is built on broken trust. Fathers fear their sons. Brothers betray brothers. Lovers deceive lovers. And the gods, for all their might, fall prey to the same poison that brings down mortals. Ambition, pride, envy, power. Because in mythology, betrayal isn't just a dramatic twist. It's inevitable, a divine constant, a reminder that power, no matter how sacred, always breeds suspicion. And perhaps the ancients knew something we still struggle to admit, that no throne, not even one in the heavens, is immune to betrayal. Not all myths survived the march of time. Some were banned, demonized, or buried, not because they were false, but because they were too dangerous to be remembered. Empires rise, religions spread, and with them comes the need to control stories, to reshape the divine into something useful, moral, or manageable. What gets erased? Often, it's the gods and spirits that don't fit the new world order. The ones who challenge patriarchal systems, who blur the lines between good and evil, or who refuse to bow to a singular god. Let's begin with Lilith, a name whispered through the margins of ancient Jewish texts. In some traditions, she was Adam's first wife, created from the same earth as him, not from his rib. She refused to submit to him, fled Eden, and was later demonized as a child-killing night hag. But earlier sources suggest something different. That Lilith was a symbol of feminine independence, feared by those who needed a subservient Eve. So they rewrote her, turned her into a monster, and buried the original myth beneath centuries of dogma. In Babylonian mythology, there was Tiamat, the primal goddess of the ocean. She created the first gods and gave birth to existence itself. But when chaos reigned, she was cast as the villain, a monstrous serpent slain by her own descendant, Marduk. He then used her body to build the sky and the earth. This wasn't just mythology, it was propaganda. Marduk became the patron god of Babylon, and Tiamat's divine feminine chaos was demonized. Order had to come from a violent conquest of the mother. These erasures weren't accidents. They were acts of control. In Celtic mythology, we meet the Morrigan, a war goddess who shapeshifts, controls fate, and appears as a crow before death. She was a goddess of battle, sovereignty, sexuality, and prophecy. Too wild, too complex, too uncontainable. When Christianity spread through Ireland, the Morrigan was reduced to a hag, or a mere witch figure. Her myth collapsed into fragments. Even the indigenous gods of the Americas suffered erasure. Entire pantheons, gods of the sun, maize, death, and rebirth, were crushed under colonial boots. Temples were razed. Sacred codices burned. Priests rewritten as devil worshippers. Myth wiped out in the name of civilization. And yet some survived. In oral traditions, in carvings, in dreams. Because stories, especially the forbidden ones, are hard to kill. But why were these myths silenced? Because they challenged power. They honored women, chaos, duality, and the sacred darkness of the world, concepts that didn't fit with patriarchal or monotheistic systems. They showed that gods didn't have to be good, that they could be terrifying, raw, even divine because of their contradictions. By erasing these myths, humanity didn't just lose stories. We lost ways of understanding ourselves. We lost gods who could bleed and scream and love without rules. We lost the right to see the divine in rage, in shadow, in blood and fire. And what replaced them? Order, hierarchy, doctrine, one God, one truth. But the cost was complexity. So now, we dig back through the ash, reconstruct the shattered myths, and reclaim the stories we were never meant to remember. Because sometimes, the gods that were silenced are the ones that speak loudest in the dark. In an age of superheroes, feel-good parables, and moral clarity, it's easy to wonder, why revisit these ancient, brutal, chaotic myths at all? Why tell stories where gods devour children, betray family, or collapse in fear of their own creations? Because in those stories, the dark, the uncomfortable, the raw, we find a deeper kind of truth. Ancient mythology wasn't written to soothe us. It wasn't crafted to reinforce laws or make people behave. It was created to help us survive, to make sense of plagues, wars, storms, grief, betrayal, love, lust, and madness. In those times, life wasn't fair, so neither were the gods. The ancients saw reality reflected in myth. A king who abuses power, like Zeus. A family torn apart by jealousy, like Set and Osiris. A force of nature that both gives and takes life, like Tiamat. A world destined to end, like in Ragnarok. These weren't fairy tales. They were emotional survival guides. They told us, you are not alone in your fear. Even the gods feel it. You are not wicked for feeling rage. Even the divine are ruled by it. You are not broken for being conflicted. The world was born in conflict. Dark myths gave shape to the chaos people lived with every day. Instead of hiding from it, they stared it in the face and called it sacred. Even today, when we experience grief or betrayal or existential dread, we instinctively reach for story. And when we do, the old myths still whisper, "This is not new. Others have walked this fire before you, and they turned it into legend." There's also a powerful freedom in these myths. They don't force you to see the world as black and white. They allow for contradiction, for a god to be both a protector and a destroyer, a lover and a killer, a savior and a curse. They teach us that complexity is not chaos. It is truth. And maybe that's why these stories were once buried. Because complexity threatens order. Because gods who bleed make us question gods who command. But we need those stories now more than ever. In a world craving clarity, the old myths invite us into honest reflection. They help us understand the darkness within, not as something to fear, but something to know. Because when we confront the gods at their worst, we better understand ourselves at our most human. The gods weren't perfect. They lied. They stole. They burned, killed, and wept. They made the world and then broke it. Again and again. And yet, we remembered them. Not because they were pure, but because they were powerful. Because their stories echoed the deepest parts of our own. We crave perfection in our modern world. Heroes without flaw. Answers without doubt. But the ancients knew better. They knew that truth was rarely clean, that divinity could be found not just in light, but in shadow. The darkest myths were never meant to frighten us. They were meant to free us, to remind us that chaos is part of life, that betrayal, fear, death, and loss are not the end. They are ingredients in the myth of being human. Maybe that's why these stories refuse to die. They haunt ruins, echo in rituals, survive in language and dream. And maybe, just maybe, they survive because we need them to. Because behind every monstrous god, every cursed prophecy, every forbidden tale, lies the oldest truth of all, that even in darkness, there is meaning, that even in destruction, there is memory, and that the stories we bury are often the ones that show us who we truly are. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Lore Lineage Chronicles for more in mythology, myth, and history.